Hello and welcome to BigMarker. My name is Hannah and I am the Director of Customer Success here at BigMarker, and I'll be taking you through the demonstration of the BigMarker platform today. And what you're seeing on your screen now is an example of the BigMarker channel. And the channel is essentially just like a company account where all of your webinars are stored. That can mean upcoming sessions. It also means the on-demand or recorded webinars that you have access to, and all of your past non-recorded webinars, as well as any series that you have on BigMarker. And we'll learn more about these webinar types moving forward. But right now on the channel, just getting a general sense of what this essentially means. Again, it's like a company or organizational account to store your content. And on this channel as well, you can decide whether or not people can become subscribers to your channel. You'll notice a subscribers tab and a discussion section as well if you want to communicate with subscribers on the channel. However, this is actually not required. You can keep your channel internal if you would like. It's totally up to you. And this can be managed on the settings section by making your channel private or public facing as well. Finally, the last aspect of the channel is the concept of channel hosts. And depending on the plan that you have with BigMarker, you'll have a certain number of what's called host licenses included in the subscription. But if you need to add more host licenses, and these are people who can create webinars on the account, you can do so by clicking the Manage Co-host button here at the bottom and adding more hosts for $19 a month per host. Now, the channel is really the macro view of your BigMarker account. Again, it's where your content is stored. However, to actually create individual webinars, you'll notice that there's a Create a Webinar button at the top right corner of pretty much any page that you see on BigMarker. And when you click this button, that will bring you to a page that asks you the type of webinar that you want to create. And on BigMarker, we have several different kinds of webinars that you can create. So let's go through each of these webinar types now. The first webinar type is the live webinar format, and this is simply just any sort of live scheduled event that you plan to host manually. So it's great for webinars, but it's also used for meetings, for classes, trainings. It's sort of like the catch-all for all live event hosting on BigMarker. The next is on-demand webinars, and an on-demand webinar on BigMarker is quite simply just a recorded video that you're uploading to a landing page on BigMarker. And this is great if you have videos that you want to import into BigMarker so that people can watch them on demand. And the thing about an on-demand webinar that makes it a little bit better than just putting the video on YouTube or Vimeo, for example, is that you can do things like customize the landing page, you can collect registrations to view the recording, and you can also sell tickets if you so choose. So there's a lot more customization and ability with the on-demand than, like I said, putting it on something like YouTube or Vimeo. Of course, if you do record your live webinar, you can also publish the live webinar recording for on-demand viewing, so you don't need to create a separate on-demand webinar. You can just publish it on the live webinar page. The next webinar type is automated, and actually I'm going to group automated and evergreen webinars into the same category because these two webinar types are exactly the same in what they do. The difference between them is how they're scheduled. So an automated webinar on BigMarker is simply just a webinar that you're adding pre-recorded or pre-populated events to so that they automatically trigger during a live webinar. And so you can add things like pre-recorded video or chats, polls, any sort of pop-ups that you want to share during that webinar, and then they will automatically play during that live session. And again, since it is still hosted in a live webinar environment, you can feel free to enter and moderate the session. You can also join to facilitate a live Q&A or host a hybrid webinar. And again, both the automated and evergreen webinar are exactly the same in what they do. Again, the difference between these is how they're scheduled. So automated webinars are scheduled individually, very similarly to live webinars. You can either do one single automated event, or you can also do recurring automated webinars where you handpick each recurring time that the automated webinar will play. The evergreen webinar is a little bit different. This webinar type you can set on an automated recurring basis so that it automatically generates events based on the timeline that you scheduled. So what I mean by that is Let's say you want the webinar to play every hour. So you would generate an evergreen webinar to play hourly from the hours of, let's say, 9 a.m. to 9 p.m., Monday through Friday, and then for the next 2 months. And then you can set that up, and then it will automatically generate those events based on the timeline you scheduled. The final 3 webinar types we have are live stream, which is simply if you want to stream to Facebook Live or YouTube Live. A 24/7 webinar, which is simply an always open live webinar room. It has all of the features and functionality that a regular live webinar has, except you cannot record. So a lot of times this is utilized for quick drop-in meetings and more informal sessions than a regular scheduled webinar. Finally, we have the webinar series type, which is simply a grouping of webinars for one single registration. So let's say you want to offer a 5-part class, but you only want people to register once. You would be able to set up the webinar series feature, and these webinars can be either live, on demand, or automated in the series. Now, once you pick the webinar type you want to create, you simply click Create One, and that brings you to the scheduling page where you can give it a title, an About section, picking the date and time, and then from there, you can create the webinar. And once the webinar is created, you generate what's called a landing page for that webinar. And I have one already set up here. And this is the public-facing page, so when people come to your webinar to register or attend, this is where they land and this is what they will see. And what I just mentioned is that this is the page where people come to register. It's also the place where they come to enter the webinar when it's live. And if you choose to record your webinar and you want to publish that recording for on-demand viewing, you can publish it to this landing page as well. So this page will act as the webinar page throughout the entire life cycle of the webinar, and the link won't change either. And this is a highly customizable page. As you can see here, I have this admin toolbar at the top corner of my screen with 3 buttons. The first is Edit Page, which allows me to do live editing on the page, such as adding a banner image, changing the button color, adding a logo in the top left, and then all of these other content sections in the left navigator, such as adding an About section, featured presenters, etc. Now we've mentioned the live editing, but the actual formatting of the page or the template of the page can also be changed. To do this, click on the Change Template button at the top right corner of the screen, and you'll be brought to a page that gives you all of the different template designs that you can choose from. This actually reorganizes the entire page and gives it an entirely different layout. So for example, if we were to preview one, you'll notice that it looks very different from the one we were just on. In this one, it has a large image that takes up the entire page. It also has a registration form and more robust featured presenters on the right-hand side. The kind of last and final aspect of the creation process is the management side of things. And when you click the Manage Webinar button here, it actually takes you to the back end of your webinar. And as a host, this is what you'll want to be more familiar with because this is what you manage and control for each webinar. And you'll notice that it's broken down into 6 tabs at the top of the screen: Edit, Design, Emails and Invitations, Manage Webinar, Automation, and Integrations. Now, we'll cover a few sections in each of these tabs, but really organizationally speaking is what we want to cover today. So the Edit tab here is where all of your true editing details or webinar details can be managed. So things like editing the title or the date and time can be managed in this webinar details section. The presenters section is for adding guest presenters, and this is actually a little different than the host licenses we covered on the channel. Guest presenters on BigMarker are free to add, and you can add as many as you like, and these can be added and managed from the presenter section here just by clicking Add New Presenter if you want to add a new one from scratch, or if you've added one before, you can choose one from the presenters listed in your channel. Also on this page, you can do things like sell tickets to your webinar. You'll notice that you can sell tickets to both your live and your recorded session. You can also add a donation option as well if you don't want to make the paid tickets required, as well as all of the privacy settings both for the live and the recorded session as well, and other features like dial-in and other advanced settings. Now again, the editing tab is for all of your true editing details for the webinar. The next tab is Design, which, as you can imagine, is where all of the true design elements of the webinar will be. And this section is pretty brief. It actually covers the Change Template section we already saw on the landing page. You can also change your template here. But if you also want to add branding to your live webinar, this is where you can set this up. And what I mean is that when people enter the live webinar, do you want to add a logo and also a theme color to the banner of your live webinar? To do this, all you have to do is either choose from one of our stock theme colors, or you can add your own hex color, as well as clicking the change logo icon here to add a logo to the top of your live webinar. Now we've covered editing and design, which are like the backbone editing details of the webinar. The next couple of sections are going to be more in the marketing and management space. So the first is the emails and invitations section, which is where invitations can be sent for your webinar, but also the reminders and the notification emails that people receive will also be set up and sent here. So if you do choose to send invitation emails, you can click New Invitations, and you can not only edit the actual messaging, but also the design and layout of the email and send it out to your list. But regardless of how people register, whether you're sharing the link with them or sending invitations, once people are registered on BigMarker, they receive a series of 3 emails. And these emails are rather important because each of these emails, so a confirmation email and 2 reminders, will all contain a personalized login link to make it a one-click entry into the webinar. So you'll notice you can edit these emails, you can delete some, but it's important to at least keep one so that these people have that login link they can enter right into the webinar without re-entering any registration credentials. Finally, we have some post-webinar follow-up as well. So a recording publish notification email, a feedback survey email, and also general emails if you want to send like a follow-up deal or discount code or something like that. You can also use BigMarker for that as well. So we've covered the first part of the kind of marketing tools that you have access to on BigMarker with the emails. The next section, or Manage Webinar tab here, is where a lot of these other marketing and management tools will be listed. So the dashboard here is kind of your home base. You may have noticed that we landed here first when we got to the BigMarker landing page, or rather the Manage page here. And you'll notice at the top we have a few quick links. Your shareable webinar URL, the copy webinar function, and practice webinar functionality as well. But below this, you'll also notice things like Evergreen SMS Relay. This is if you want to set up evergreen webinars and you want to respond via text message to any questions or chats coming into the chat panel in real time, and you're not planning to be in the webinar, you can set that up here. And below that, you have all of your reports, so webinar reports. We have 4 different types of reports that you can collect, an Excel file and PDF version, which actually will be emailed to you automatically following your webinar, as well as just the registrant list and live webinar transcripts, so all of the activity in the chat, polls, and Q&A section you can download as separate files. What I want to draw your attention to next are these following 2 sections, the widgets section and also the preloading section. So in the widgets section, you'll notice that you have a registration and also live webinar widget. These you can actually embed into your site to either collect registration, and you'll notice that these are customizable, so you can kind of customize the widget to your liking, whether it's an image or form-based widget that you're embedding into your site. And also the live webinar widget, which is simply just the live webinar feed that you can embed into your website. Now this is a view-only stream, so people would not be able to communicate in the chat or do any of the other kind of interactive pieces here. But if you just want to stream your live webinar on your own website, you can just gather this iframe code here and embed it right into your site. And as mentioned, the last thing that I want to cover on this page is preloading. And preloading is quite simply just the ability to pre-upload content that you plan to share manually during your live webinar, so it's ready and waiting for you when you enter the webinar. And so you can import things like slide decks, videos, so YouTube or MP4 files, handouts, anything you want to make available for download in your live webinar, and also polls and pop-ups. And all of these can be pre-uploaded again, so they're ready and waiting for you. However, This is not how you add automations. This is only going to be used for live webinars. If you want to automate your webinar, that takes me to the 5th tab, the Automation tab, which is where all of the automations are set up for evergreen and automated webinars. On this section, you'll notice that you have what's called our automated workflow, where we have 3 default events: the open time, which is 15 minutes before the scheduled time, the start time, so the scheduled start time, and then the end time of the webinar. And any events that you want to add in between these 3 events is fair game. So you can either do one of 2 ways for importing events. You can either import individual events by adding new auto events, and to do that, you just click that. And you select the type of content you want to share. Perhaps it's a video, chat, handout, poll, or offer. And when you select the piece of content you want to share, a drawer will slide out asking you the exact moment you want that piece of content to trigger, followed by the actual piece of content itself. And you just click Save, and it will go right into this timeline. So you can continue building on this automation one by one. The other way to do it is to import from a previous webinar or even a CSV file. So if you import from a previous webinar, all you have to do is select the webinar you want to import from and the events you want to import. And once it's imported, again, it will just go right into your timeline of events. Another cool feature that we have here is if you don't want to import your chats individually, let's say you want to manage them on a larger scale, you can go over to the chat tab here and import your chat messages and manage them a little bit better here. So this is a section specifically for users who really want to populate their automated or evergreen webinars with a lot of chats, and it can be both from the host, it can be from attendees, it could even be from made up people. You can either again import or you can add new messages individually and decide exactly what you want to add. Finally, the audience permissions. And again, you can decide whether or not you want to be present in your automated or evergreen webinar. If you're not going to be there, you may want to think about turning off the first 2 toggles just to have a little bit more control over the webinar environment. However, if you are planning to be there, you can certainly choose to have the public chat or attendee list on. It's totally up to you. And finally, in this section, if you want to test automation, you can generate a play test, and that will test the automations that you have set up in the timeline. Now, the final tab that we have here is the integrations section, and this is the last and final tab on the back end of the webinar. The integrations tab is where all of the tools BigMarker directly integrates with will be. So a lot of management tools, marketing, mail management, etc. will be listed here. And if you don't see your favorite tool listed, we also do offer a Zapier integration here that will allow you to integrate with that favorite tool. Now, we've covered the back end of the webinar in a good bit of detail, and the third and final thing that I want to cover in today's demo is the live hosting experience. So I have a 24/7 webinar already set up, and I'm going to enter today's session as a host, but I'll also show you around as what an attendee will see as well. So again, I'm entering this session right now as a host, and the first thing that I see as a host or presenter, and what my attendees will not see, is the audio option. The attendees will just kind of bypass this and enter right in, but for hosts, you can decide if you want to join by telephone or by computer audio, so a web-based microphone or webcam, or you can X out and choose later. Now, this is the blank state of the webinar room as I see it as a host. And again, it does have a little bit of a different view than what my attendees will see. And really, this room is broken down into 4 parts, only 2 of which is what your attendees will see. So to illustrate that, I have some preloaded slide content that I can go ahead and open. And when I do, I'm actually going to zoom in a bit because the only 2 aspects of the webinar experience that my audience will see is whatever I'm sharing with them here on the presentation screen, and that could be slides, it could be video content, it could be webcams, and it could also be screen sharing as well, or any combination of webcam and the other sharing options. And then you have the chat panel to the right of that content, and your attendees will also be able to see this. Now, as a host, you can limit what people can and cannot do in the chat panel, but again, these are the only 2 aspects of the webinar experience that your audience will have access to. What your attendees will not see, but what you have access to as a host, is the sharing toolbar here at the top right corner of the screen. You'll notice you can share a microphone, webcam, screen sharing, slide sharing, video content, and also offer pop-ups as well. And if you preloaded that content, they'll be ready and waiting for you in these 3 tabs. Finally, you have the host control panel, and these are the actual controls of the webinar, and anyone with admin access to the webinar will have access to this host control panel. Now, you'll notice here on the audience tab that you can limit what people can and cannot do by modifying the audience permissions section, so turning on and off the public chat, for example, or the Q&A section. But you'll notice that we have a few toggles that are auto disabled by default, 2 of which are kind of important to recognize because these are better utilized as a meeting tool than they are a webinar tool. And this is the enable all attendee mics. So if I enable all attendee mics or webcams, this allows anyone in my attendee list at any time to share a microphone or webcam. Again, this is better suited for meetings, but if you do choose to use this in your webinar, just proceed with caution. Another option for people who want their attendees to share a mic or webcam but don't want to give everyone access is to keep these toggles off, and instead in the individual permissions section below, you can find your attendees' names listed individually in the attendee list, and next to each attendee's name you'll see a microphone and a webcam icon that you can enable for individual attendees without giving everyone access. The final tabs that I want to cover in the host control panel are the recording tab, which allows you to start and stop your recording. Unfortunately, this will not be an automated process, so you must click the start recording button in order to record your webinar. And the automation tab. So if you had automations or an automated webinar playing in your webinar, then you will be able to follow along with your automations in real time so that if you do plan to interject with a microphone or webcam or any other content, you won't actually interfere with the automation flow. So what I mean by this is you'll see all of the countdowns. Perhaps your video will play in 2 minutes and 32 seconds and the next chat will send in 15 minutes or something like that. You'll be able to see those countdowns. So if you wanted to, for example, share a welcome message with your microphone or webcam, you won't cut into that video that's about to play in 2 minutes. So again, these are all of the controls that you'll see during your live webinar. And that is all for today's session. Again, to quickly recap what we covered the BigMarker channel, the webinar setup process, and also the hosting experience from both a host and an attendee's perspective. Thank you so much for joining me today. It was a pleasure and happy hosting.